Become a sustaining member of the Commonwealth Club for just $10 a month.
Welcome, everybody, to today's virtual Commonwealth Club program. I am Gary Vaynerchuk. First, I want to thank the Bernard Osher Foundation for today's Good Lit event. I am so excited for this because I get to introduce one of my favorite people out there running around the world, Bose St. John. She is the author of The Urgent Life, My Story in Love, Loss, and Survival. Now, before we get going, I want everybody here who's watching to know that we want questions all lined up and have it ready in the chat. And so please be a part of this. But you're in for a real treat because this woman is nothing short of a supernova. I've watched from afar and sometimes up close on the journey that she has been on. And it is my great honor to be with all of you. And I'm excited to be here. Bose, how are you?
Oh, thank you, Gary. I'm feeling all emotional already. Okay. Like my emotions are all the way up here. So I so appreciate what you just said. It's so fantastic to be in conversation with you. You know, obviously it's like, look, we're friends. And this very moment in time, it is a really scary feeling to put all this vulnerability into the world. So I'm honored that you agreed to be a part of this so that we can have a very open conversation, you know, and
Yes.
feel safe in it. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
I really want to get into a lot of stuff. Actually, before I even get into the book starts with a quote, I really want to talk about that. But even before that, I was about to go there, but instead of an appetizer, I'm going to go with a moose bouche because you said something. What propelled you to want to go so vulnerable in a time where vulnerable was always hard? But emotions are sky high across the board in our country, in this world.
Yeah.
What made you want to go there?
Yeah. Oh gosh. Well, I think there's a number of things, you know, the as my success has been documented or, you know, awards come and those type of things, it started to feel like, you know, that as if like there was an understanding that you know, we're all human. Sometimes I feel like leaders, it's like almost like you're living in some sort of like brick and mortar, I don't know, compound where there's no, you know, human back there, no emotion.
AKA no problems. Everything was great.
Everything
it was so
is
easy
fine.
to get here. And if I make fun of you, you're not going to feel it because you have it so good.
That part, you know, it just started to feel like that. And I was just like, wait, hold on. Like, and I remember once that I was actually in an interview and somebody said to me, they were like, gosh, you know, like at the end of your career, you're going to be so celebrated for all of your accomplishments, you know, all these things that you're racking up. And I just looked at them in such confusion because I was just like, wait, but like, no, that's actually not it. Like, I don't want to be celebrated that way. I want to be celebrated for the things I've overcome. You know, like I've overcome a lot to get to this place. There's been no silver spoon. There's been no smooth path. Even the difficulty for a Black woman to get into any kind of corporate spaces, it's not even just that. Right. You know, it's like everything else that has been laid on top.
What we're about to go into in this incredible hour, it's not just the things that all of us can see.
Correct.
By the way we look at you.
That's right.
If we're logical and awake to scenarios, we're like, man, she really did it being a Black woman in America during this time. That's hard.
That's hard in and of itself.
Right. You're talking about what we're about to go into, a lot of real life stuff that was real hard.
Yeah. Yeah. And it just felt to me that like, you know, we don't have enough of that. We don't have enough honesty and vulnerability and truth, you know, from people who are supposed to be leading big corporations or companies or movements or organizations. You know, there's not enough truth.
Do you think that, this is an interesting question you just spurred up, do you think that's a double-edged sword where the human, the the me, the many others out there that live a life that looks like this, that we both understand that if we go with like, well, you don't know how hard it was to get here, that the person on the other side can only see where we're at, and that's not going to land. So that's not productive. And there's a level of us not spending time on explaining it either, because we're moving and building and helping along the way as well. And so it becomes this thing where like on both sides, you don't feel over compelled to go there. Do you think it's the double side of that, which is why so many people don't do it? Because you're like, it's not going to land with a lot of people anyway. Plus all that energy to defend it or explain it or give clarity to it. If I deploy that against helping people or helping continue to achieve what one wants to achieve, do you feel like that person who you are very much one of, that's why they end up not being vulnerable and spending a lot of time and effort on it?
That is probably very true, you know, but I wish we would get over ourselves. You know what I'm saying? It's like, stop thinking so much about like how you appear. You know what I'm saying? Yes. It's like, why are we so concerned about that? Everybody wants to talk about living life unapologetically and like, oh, you know, it's like nothing bothers. Well, no, things bother you because you're so concerned about like, you know, whether or not somebody's going to think that your pain is worthy.
Sure.
You know, and that's the thing that I think is so maybe misguided and incorrect about the way that we communicate these days, you know, as if like we're in competition with each other on who has the most pain. It's like, where did we get that? You know what I mean? And that's by the way,
as if we could score pain, right? As if we could score pain. Yeah,
that's right. That's right. And you know, it's interesting because even in writing this book, I mean, again, all honesty and vulnerability, like I thought for a minute, I was just like, gosh, I wonder if people are going to look at this and be like, God damn, she's been through a lot. Like, oh my God, is she all right? You know, it's like, no, I'm not all right. I'm not all right. You know, it's like, I'm not all right. I've had a lot of things go on. And that is why I think I'm a more empathetic human because of the things I've been through. But this is not a competition. You know, it's like, I don't believe in comparing grief and being like, oh, this person's hurt so much and that person has hurt just a little bit. Who's the score of that?
Before I'm getting off a tangent, but you know, when you asked me to do this, you knew it was going to go in all sorts of directions. So stick with me.
Yes, I wanted that.
Yes, I figured the others could go standard so we can get to some stuff that is a little field. Do you feel that work was an outlet for you? Your pain? Do you feel like your professional career is this successful because it was a safe place from your real life? And then thus, since it was a safe place because you were so darn good at it, you put in the time, the effort, and it became a safe place?
That's a really complicated question. Gosh, that's so complicated.
Right? Because what's so fascinating about that question is, again, back to who you are.
Yeah.
Everyone's like, man, work must have been real tough for Bose to climb up the ladder the way she did, the way she looks. Yeah. When I started getting under the hood here, and even in the first 10 minutes here, especially because I come from an immigrant background where I think a lot of immigrants really used work as a safe place to all the pain they had, especially in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s.
Yeah.
I would even say to me, work was always a safe place where no matter what was going on in my life, that 9 to 7, that 9 to 8, I didn't say 9 to 5 because it was safe. So I got that 6, 7, 8, 9. Do you feel like, even though on paper it looks like work was a tough place for you to navigate, given that you're going through real stuff in your life, do you think work, because of the talents you had, ended up being an actually safe place?
Yeah, I say that that's really complicated because I've never felt safe at work. You know, I've never felt comfortable, even though I know I'm talented, even though I'm really good at what I do. It was always still a battle, you know, to like just have a voice and to be seen, and even with success, and success is even like relative. You know what I mean? It's like, what does success actually mean? You know, it's like, is it successful because of the titles I've had? You know, am I successful because of like what looks like an unscathed career? Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't even know.
To your point that I think a lot of people may miss is when you're the CMO of these fancy places, there's still the CEO. There's still the CFO. There's still the COO.
Yes.
On a good day, you have the 4th biggest title in a big room.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and Gary, there are still the people on your team who sometimes don't want you to win,
including
so,
the people.
I mean,
the people reporting to you and
correct.
struggling with that.
Correct. They have a problem with reporting to a Black woman.
Yeah,
there's that too. So it's layered. So I think to some degree, I think my pain just shifted. It's kind of like leaving the office and escaping that pain, so that at home I didn't have to think about it, but I was just dealing with a different pain. And then leaving home.
What made it? Again, I apologize to the crowd, because this is what happens when you get friends together. I'm on my own journey here. I apologize for completely wrecking this, and I know we're jumping way ahead. We'll come back and create some context here around what pain we're talking about.
Yeah.
But where did you find in that double pain? Where are you finding comfort?
Yeah.
How are you making double pain sustainable?
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, I think that's part of the journey that I'm talking about in the book, which is like, love to me is not just like the love of other people or love of work or love of even life. It's love of myself.
Of course.
It's like this to me, it's like, I dedicated the book to my daughter. I love her very much. I want her to know me as a human, but really the book is a love letter to myself.
Good for you.
It's like, look, I survived these things, man. Now I didn't say I survived them whole now, okay? Because again, we're doing truth and honesty here. I didn't say that like, oh, look, everything is beautiful and perfect. You know what I'm saying? I'm wearing a flower crown, but that don't mean everything is coming up roses.
No such thing for the human journey.
No, exactly.
There may be a good day. There may be a good month. There may be a good year. There may be a good decade. But when you are a human and you love, there's going to be pain.
Yeah.
It's just, there is no one who went the 90 years and was like, that was easy.
Exactly. Like everything was smooth. But I think to your original question, it's like, we're all managing things, whether it's constant or it's 1 year or, one bad day. It's like, there's something going on, but we're not actually talking about it, And it wasn't until I started opening up about what I was going through, even though that was also very scary, right? Because there's rejection. You can feel like people are going to be like, oh, she just wants a pity party.
Judgment.
Why is she complaining? It's like, oh, suck it up, do the work, But it really wasn't until I opened up that I found support, even with colleagues.
Makes sense.
With colleagues. Yeah.
Let's go into it. Let's give people some context here, because we're off and running. The book starts out with a quote. Why?
Because it was the first time that Diane Ackerman, who's an author who I quote in the epitaph, it was the first time I'd seen somebody articulate how I felt I wanted to live my life. So I'll paraphrase it, right?
Yep.
What she said is, I don't want to get to the end of my life and find that I've just lived the length of it. I want to have lived the width of it. And I just, that just blew my mind, because I was like, yeah, exactly. We're all like eating well and doing meditation and drinking water and doing all these things so that you can like have long years, right? That's what everybody says, like live a long life. Like that's hashtag goals, long life. Somebody passes away when they're 95 and we're like, oh, they lived a nice long life. How do you know that their life was full of anything? Did it have the width in the life?
The width for me, definition wise, is not necessarily the width that you and I optically have had in our professional lives. Width, when I hear you say that, and when I've seen that quote, for me, width means happy.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like again, for me, being an entrepreneur, very scary for a lot of people, but I didn't have to deal with what you did with, there's somebody who could say you don't work here anymore. Right. The world could say that. Which is what's scary about being an entrepreneur. The whole thing says you can't. You go out of business. But I think when you say width, it's not about traveling the world and seeing it all. Right. Unless that's the single thing on earth that makes you the happiest. Right? It doesn't mean that you golf and sail all the time and it's leisure, unless it's the single thing that makes you happy in the world. To me, if the individuals watching this leave with means fight for happiness
Mm.
on your definition of happiness,
Mm.
well, then this interview was worthwhile.
Yes, I completely agree, because it really does need to be filled with things that are going to make you satisfied in your life. You know, I think
Yes.
that's for me what I have learned, you know, which is that, yes, of course, we all want many, many years, and we all, you know, grieve when you hear of somebody who didn't get a chance to live a long life, you know, but I think my goal for my life is to be able to live in such a way that should it come to an end anytime soon,
No regrets.
I would be really satisfied.
Yeah.
With what I've done. You know, really
I think about this all the time. A 27-year-old who just devastating for someone like that being taken off the earth, living a dramatically more fulfilled life than a 92-year-old. That, I mean, I have relatives who grew up their entire lives in the Soviet Union, you know, before we were able to leave. And because of the culture there and the nature of that country, and then their own DNA, because I know a lot of people that had jolly DNA from the Soviet Union, but I personally know very close family members who I can speak to living 80 and 90 years, very unsatisfied, very anxious, very jealous, very envious, very challenging lives.
Yeah. Yeah. That's just it. You know, it's like, look, we can all think about maybe our own lives or people that we know around us who are put in circumstances that are not ideal.
Yes.
Right. And I think that's also part of this, which is just like, look, not everything in your life is a choice, right? Things happen to you or in your situations that are not great. You know, and so the question is like, well, how are you still going to live a life that has width, even within those circumstances? And that is what I've learned in the Urgent Life.
I love it. Let's go into chapter 1 then.
Yeah.
You wrote that Peter's upbringing loomed in stark contrast to mine. Give us all who Peter is, what that meant, because that's the thing that stood out for me.
Yes. Well, Peter was my husband. We met while working, office romance. So I was working in New York at for Spike Lee's advertising agency, which was a joint venture with DDB, which is a huge advertising agency. It's like what Mad Men was, you know, made after and all of that. So the entire building was like DDB. And then Spike had his little, you know, like a fiefdom on the 3rd floor where the Black people were. You know what I mean? And Peter worked at DDB. So the cafeteria and I think like the mailroom were the only places where we actually like intermingled. Yes, that's right. So Peter and I met in the cafeteria. I know, very romantic, very, very luxurious. You know,
excuse me, as you know, I have an advertising agency, and for the last 13 years, the predominant amount of people that have worked here have been under the 30 years old range. So I've seen plenty of romance in the cafeteria. I know exactly what that looks like.
Exactly. But you know, I was struck by him because he was so bold, first of all, in asking me out, which I was just like, who is this like tall white man who's like wearing a gold chain? Like, why does he think that he even has a shot with me? You know? And to make a long story short, which is all written in great detail, I challenged him to read Toni Morrison, Song of Solomon, which is my favorite book, my favorite author. She's very difficult to read, you know, she's a Black woman who talks about the Black experience in very unapologetic ways, very, very deep. Like she makes you rise to the occasion, you know? And I challenged him to read it. And I was surprised when he did and had thoughts about it that we could actually discuss.
So just for everybody here, because I know everyone's going to get the book and then some, but for the interview, he asks you out and you say, not until you read this book?
That's correct. Yeah. Because I was just like, hey, because his line was like, he wants to get to know me. And I was like, well, you could get to know me by reading this book.
Thank God that wasn't my journey, because my reading comprehension's so bad, it would have taken me 12 years to ask you out. So he's able to read. And
yes, he's able to read. He has great comprehension. He does it.
He does it.
And in our discussions, I mean, look, Peter, I think is like most white Americans, that he wants to have a diverse, you know, friend group, and doesn't consider himself or didn't consider himself racist by any means or biased by any means. But that just wasn't the world he operated in. You know, it's like he didn't have any Black friends. He didn't know any Black people, really, you know, besides a couple of people he worked with. And I was very surprised by how much our cultural differences, like they were vast. It being, like you said, you're a child of immigrants, so am I. Peter was a second generation American. So his parent or his grandfather came from Italy, or his grandparents came from Italy, you know, so we understood that. But that's where the similarities kind of ended. You know, it's like, look, being a tall, good looking white man in the United States of America is a very different experience from being a Black woman in America.
An attractive Black woman in America.
Well, you know,
if you're giving Peter dabs, give yourself some.
I'm just saying my flower crown helps.
So what happened there? Like what should we touch on that before we go into, because I really want to talk about your Ghanese father's dreams in chapter 2. Do we want to leave chapter 1 for now and come back to it?
Well, I think all I will say on that part is that, you know, I think especially in today's age, you know, we talk so much about diversity, inclusion, and, you know, our relations as people of different ethnicities in especially the US. But we don't talk enough honestly about what that actually means. You know, it's like, look, there were many times when I was pretty pissed off at Peter for his whiteness, even though I was in love with the man, you know, that like he could really move around anywhere he wanted to without question. And later on in the book, I talk about a trip we took to Ghana, you know, where I wanted him to see the country and like enjoy the culture and all that. But it was such a complicated trip for me because at the same time that I wanted him to go and enjoy the culture, I also wanted him to feel otherness. I wanted him to feel how I feel when I'm walking around these streets. You know, it's like, this is my home. America's my home, yet I don't feel comfortable outside. You know, and I wanted him to feel that.
Was that achieved, or was he?
No, it was not. And that should piss me off.
I'll tell you why I asked that. I am aware that I'm a white male, but the luxury of not being born in this country and then going to Martin Luther King Elementary School. And not only did I go to Martin Luther King Elementary School, we had incredible amounts of Indian and Asian. It was just, it's crazy when I look at I found my second grade picture a couple years ago and I was like, this is, you know, you have the luxury of growing up in I mean, mine was like, most people I know consider diversity like 2 groups of people. My entire childhood was like 7.
Right.
And so like, to me, I'm on the board of Pencil Promise. So I've been to Ghana, and really take me anywhere, Singapore, Ghana, Korea, you know, Finland. Notice how I asked you that question. Was it achieved? I didn't get the luxury of knowing Peter, but for me, I'm just in it right away. Yeah. And some people are fortunate that way, even if they didn't grow up with as much diversity as I did. Yeah. And so he was just like, and were you pissed? Were you like, God damn it?
I was really pissed off because the thing is that, like, look, the truth of the matter is that, you know, there are just allowances given to white people.
I see. So it wasn't that he was so great at conforming or feeling it.
He was awesome at that.
It was that people were so gracious to him.
Correct. Yes, that's the difference I'm talking about. That exactly like that. You know, it's just like, look, nobody looked at him crazy.
Right.
Nobody said, get out of here.
Welcoming
him. You know, nobody said like, what are you doing here? You know, no one looked at him askew when he walked into a store. Like if it was curiosity, it was loving curiosity. Whereas I never walk the planet with that privilege ever, anywhere, not in America, not in Europe, nowhere, you know? And so I think my point is that I was really pissed off.
I apologize. Not in Ghana?
No, because in Ghana,
you were too American.
Well, absolutely too American.
Yeah, of course.
When I open my mouth, it's over with. You know what I mean? It's done.
Yeah, Russians really make fun of me when I try to speak Russian.
Yeah, look,
they're like, get out of here, American boy. I'm like,
exactly.
I apologize. Do you have any vodka? I'll see you later. You know, I get it. Let's move on because I don't want to run out of time. There's so much here. Let's talk about this. You talk about carrying the hopes and dreams of your father. And to me, this really resonated given my background. So let's talk about that.
Yes. Well, my father had 4 daughters I think like most African men and maybe other cultures of that era, he was hoping for a son to carry on his name. Sure. And when that was not going to happen, he was like, oh, okay, you girls are going to do it then, you know? And he was pretty severe about it, you know? But the thing, Gary, that I didn't even recognize, and I say this in the book, which is like, I didn't even really know, to be honest with you, until I was in my 20s, like where my hopes and aspirations began and where his ended. You know, I just assumed it. I just took it on, you know, and said, oh, yeah. Well, that's what he wants me to do. That sounds good. I'm going to do that. Didn't want to disappoint him.
Did you use the word we a lot?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, we. It was absolutely.
Remember, we're going to build this. We're going to do it.
Yes.
Immigrants have a real we-ness to it that is very heavy.
Yes. Very, very heavy to carry, you know, and being the eldest, I often heard like, you know, you got to set a good example for your sisters. You know, it's like, don't ruin it for everybody. You know, so like, how could I feel like I could break out and try something new, take a risk? Like there was nothing like that, you know? So it showed up in all kinds of ways, whether it was the career I was going to have, you know? So for that reason, I was pre-med. Grades weren't even a question. It's like, look, you had to have good grades. But it's like when I got to college, I was pre-med because my dad wanted me to be a doctor. And even though I was like, sure, yeah, I guess I can, you know, because I happened to be good at science and math and it was not a problem. So I was like, okay. And then, but the thing is that like, I was really in love with African-American studies and English and poetry and music and like all these other things. So Gary, I didn't say like, oh no, I'm not going to be a doctor. I said, oh, okay, I'll do pre-med and I'll add these other things. And I'll add these things. So it wasn't until really Peter, that was really the first time I defied my dad's wishes. You know, like when
did he want you to marry an African man?
Oh yes, of course.
African or American or an American who was black.
Not even. No, he was more narrow than that. It wasn't even that like an African, a Ghanaian person.
Yeah.
And so it's like, you know,
for all the Americans who are watching, for all the Americans watching, there are 53 countries or so in the continent of Africa. Yes. I know that's something that the US needs to get a little bit better at. So when you're saying that lands with me with my micro education above the norm, that he went even more narrow.
Oh yeah, even more narrow. But the thing is that like love has a way of making you brave sometimes, you know?
Oh, it sure does.
It really does. And that was the first time when I was just like, no, I really like this guy. And I think I want to live with him. My dad was like, you want to what? Absolutely not. And that was the first time I defied anything he had to say. It wasn't like, imagine that. Like I carried a full course load of pre-med. I carried all of my like African-American and English studies and poetry and doing dance and all this stuff. Hell, I was throwing parties for Lin-Manuel Miranda in college. I was doing all that stuff. And I never said no, not until I met Peter, not until love hit me.
Let's talk about right before Peter, right before pre-med, the health scare at the end of high school.
Yes. So, thank God for TV. You know, this is why I'm not mad when people are like, do you watch television? I'm like, yes, it is a good tool. Okay. Because I was watching Beverly Hills 90210 when Brenda, a character in the show, had to do a self-breast exam. And it was their way of educating about breast cancer. And I got in the shower and did my little exam and felt a lump. Scared out of me. I literally was just like, what the hell? Like, it was literally like, I felt like I was in the show or in the movie. You know what I mean? It didn't feel like real life because when does somebody do that and actually feel the thing that they told you to feel, you know? Mm-hmm. And so I had to have a procedure, you know, to have it removed. They tested it. Thank God it wasn't cancerous, but it really screwed me up, you know, because it was the first time I thought of my own.
Yeah, I apologize. How long between you felt it and you getting the ability to exhale because it wasn't what it could have been? Do you recall?
You know, Gary, that's an awesome question because I don't think I ever exhaled.
Interesting.
I don't think I ever exhaled, you know, because it was like,
to this day,
it was like somebody telling you that the boogeyman exists and then you see it. And then it goes away, but you've seen it. And you know that's real. Like it's not a fake. It was nobody's story. You know it exists. It may not be in front of you right away. It may not be in front of you every day, but you've seen it. That's what it was like for me. And it is still like that for me. And so every time it has been proven true, whether it was because my mom got cancer, and then obviously in the book, Peter gets cancer. The boogeyman is real. I've seen it.
Right.
So I've never exhaled.
You have that. And then so you have this scare. Now you go to college. You're doing all the things daddy wants you to do, which is at the time, you don't realize how much pressure that really was, but it's there.
Yeah.
And then you have a major event with Ben, your college boyfriend.
Yes. Who also, by the way,
and then
yes, Ben was a white boy too, but he acted like a black boy, so which was great.
So he was different, right?
He was different. He was totally different.
Swag. You understood him.
Oh yeah,
You knew why he liked you.
Man, Ben had all the swag, And by the way, Ben was a complicated man. He was his mom was American, his dad is English, but grew up in Geneva speaking French. And then he comes to Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut, and is a hip hop head. And is like rapping it at battles and winning them and sweeping the floor with black boys from Brooklyn. You know what I'm saying? Like it was just, he was a complete anomaly.
Ben didn't have to do much to get your interest.
Oh no, I saw Ben perform one time and I was like, yeah, like him. That's correct. And Ben and I, like we shared a lot of things, it wasn't just like the love of hip hop, and blackness, which he like had assumed. It wasn't like his, but he assumed it. Yeah. But also, on the darker side, we shared depression. I had been battling depression since like my senior year in high school through my college years.
Did you know that was the word?
Yes, I knew that was the word because I was put on medication.
I see.
And so I was being treated, but it's like, again, love has a, big influence. Like Ben, he was depressed, but he didn't want to recognize it. He didn't want to go see anybody for it, but I could recognize the signs, and I knew he had trouble, but he was the one who would say things like, oh, you don't need that stuff. It's just going to mess with your mind. It's going to muddle you. And the truth of the matter is that like, I did feel muddled on the medication. It took the highs and the lows off and just left me somewhere in the middle. And it wasn't like a nice feeling, but I really hated the valleys. And so I didn't want to be in them. Whereas Ben was, at least now I know better. But at the time I thought, oh, he's just a creative, so he needs the valleys in order to create art.
I see. Right.
It felt that's okay.
That's such a powerful call out. The reason I asked you is, I'm 47 and the word was just not being thrown around. Like, if anything, the word I recall in the mid 90s was moody.
Yeah. Yes.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And like, now I'm like, wait a minute, that wasn't moody.
No, exactly.
Challenged. And then to your point, we kind of cheered and put a pedestal on creatives who would go up and down.
Yeah, exactly. Like some days he would like disappear and he'd be in bed all day and not talk to me and not, engage. And I was just like, oh, he's just, he's just in his space.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's an artist, but that's not healthy. And now I know that better, obviously, but tragically, Ben was just very, very ill, and I wish I had known. And to be honest with you, Gary, it's like, I think about that all the time. I think about him all the time in that when he decided to end his life, I had so much guilt and so much regret. And to some degree, I think, I haven't wholly and totally forgiven myself either for not being more, for not doing more, for not saving him.
It's the thing that in this world, that is one of the few things that really I struggle with the most, which is the guilt.
Yeah.
That people put on themselves in a situation that is 100% not winnable.
Yes. Yes.
You know,
you're absolutely right.
there's a part of me that's so creative, so weird, but there's so much practicality when it comes to emotions from me, to me, with me, in my own head. And this one is really hitting me in my chest for a couple different reasons right now. Not that I've felt personally, but people that I care about feel. And I watch it. Sometimes I'm very close to watching it, and it kills me because there is no win on that.
Yeah.
There's a part of me that feels that we have to start building real conversation in the way that we now about depression, about alcoholism, about drug use. We're gonna have to start an entire new conversation for the people that are left behind. We must console them. This concept of any level of guilt is completely and utterly unacceptable. We must stand up as a society and start building a narrative for them, because no one, not parents, not best friends, not lovers, you just can't get that deep into the head. It's just hard.
I'm so glad you said that, because I feel like there's a few communities like that often get forgotten, whether it is, those, it feels like always those left behind, I remember feeling that way when Peter passed away, that I was like, gosh, where's the community for widows? Where's the community?
But that one you're hearing about, and parents of suicide you're hearing about, but there's the rest of the crew.
Yeah.
The guilt it's enormous and something completely uncontrollable. I remember thinking people that let their friend, I grew up in the drunk driving era, and like all this, and like friends that let friends drink, like the guilt was enormous, right? That's what I grew up with in high school, junior high. A friend that like didn't take the keys, and then the kid dies.
Right. Oh my God.
Crushing.
Yeah.
But at least that one is like optically in your face.
Yes, but it's still like, what a terrible, right? Like,
but
terrible guilt.
All right, we're getting sidetracked. I'm looking at the clock.
We're having all kinds of conversations.
This really caught my attention. I was always impulsive, lacking the patience. If I had a craving, I wanted to taste it. You talk about your relationship with Peter in chapter 5. Talk to me about that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I remember someone asking me once if I've always felt urgency, and I was like, yes, I guess I have, but it wasn't, urgency meant something different, it's like,
was it ambition?
It was, I would call it impatience.
Was it curiosity?
Yeah, curiosity, but mostly impatience. Mostly just like, I just didn't want to wait. I was like, look,
why?
Because I don't think I'm just built that way, where I just
play with me on this one. I think this can help people.
Yeah.
Did you feel, was it overconfidence and you self-love and you were like, I don't need to wait 7 minutes in the micro? Was it macro things based on curiosity and ambition? Was it entitlement, believe it or not?
Yeah.
Because, sometimes that sneaks in certain micro situations. What was it?
Yeah. That's a really good question, like to go deep into it. I mean, it could stem from, even childhood, right? I think most of the things we deal with stem from childhood, where it's like my parents moved around a lot when I was a kid. And so there wasn't just a lot of time to like make friends, or like, you just never knew when it's like, oh, it's time to move, time to go.
So you were trying to squeeze everything out of the orange kind of thing?
Yeah, all the time. Exactly. It was like, so my impatience, I think, was built probably out of that kind of, behavior.
Scarcity.
Yeah. It was like, I just needed to do things all the time. And it was just like, okay, yeah, if I wanted to, like go hang out with a friend, I wasn't like, oh, let's hang out in 2 weeks. I was like, how about tonight? Like, what are you doing tonight? What are you doing tonight? But the thing is that
later in your career, were you able to harness that, and that made you very productive, and which is why you got so much done?
Yes. So I think the evolution of my urgency has become more purposeful, has become more intentional, but that happened also because of Peter, like that didn't exist before he died. Like for me, it was a moment of, gosh, so you can't just run around being reckless, with this impatience. Like, this is not, I'm not just like out here like, oh, let's hang out, let's do this, let's do that. I want to do this job, I want to do that job. No, it's like, no, I got to be more intentional because I don't know how much time we have here, and like, I want to live the width of life. And so I want to get the things done that I actually want to get done. And so for me, like, time wasting took on a new definition. And it's not necessarily even about speed, to be honest with you. Like, it really isn't that. It's like, how do I like focus on the thing I want? And I don't let anything get in the way of getting to that thing, even if it takes me a year, even if it takes me 3 years. I'm like, just don't get distracted.
Let me get to a bunch of topics before we get out of here and a couple questions that I see.
Yeah.
You and Peter get married.
Mm-hmm.
And then your parents' marriage falls apart.
Yeah.
What was the timing of that? You and Peter get married
immediately.
The next night? What were they waiting for you to get married?
Yeah, pretty much. I think they probably waited. They were like, "Ooh, let her get to the altar, and then we're gonna tell her we're getting divorced." Like, it was like that. Like, it was almost exact. Yeah, exactly. Congratulations. We don't believe in this,
right? At the brunch, right?
Yeah, no, really. It was basically like, congratulations on getting married. We don't believe in marriage anymore, so we're out of here. It was like, wait, what? It was such a shock to me, But at the same time, like, my parents hadn't been happy for a long time, So on one hand, I was like, huh, what was that? Oh, yeah. I knew. I think most kids who, like, have had parents who divorced, like, they're not getting along. You know what I'm saying? Like, but what's interesting, Gary, is that later on in my marriage with Peter, there was a moment where, I was like, hey, look, I am not happy in our marriage anymore. And him telling me that, like, well, there are lots of people who are miserable in their marriages. That hasn't meant that they got divorced. Like, why can't we just figure it out? And I literally was so stunned because I was like, I don't even understand who, like, no, I don't want to.
Too logical.
No, exactly. I was like, I don't want that. Like, I don't want to be in a miserable marriage. I'm good. No, I don't need this for anybody's opinion, And the thing is that, like, I think so many of us maybe get stuck in situations, not just marriage or relationships, but all kind of things, work and all kind of other things, because we've seen people do it who are just like, oh, just stick it out. It's like, why are you any better? Like, you should suffer too. It's like, why are we promoting a community and a culture of suffering?
Let's talk about ultimate suffering and, like, try to hit on a bunch of topics here.
Yeah.
You lose your first pregnancy.
Yes.
Ultimate suffering. And then right behind that, you have your baby girl. Talk to us about that window.
Yes. Oh, well, when I was pregnant with my first pregnancy, I just didn't know. There wasn't a lot of conversation. And by the way, it's something that I am actively also trying to open as I talk about this book and in these conversations, because now we talk a little bit more about maternal health, especially as dangerous to African-American women. I think, when Serena Williams almost died in her pregnancy and childbirth, it was like, oh, wait, hold on. I'm sorry. She's a very successful, very public, very, wealthy Black woman who has resources to the best medical care. And she also, like, how is that possible? But there just wasn't enough conversation around the dangers. And I wasn't aware. And my doctor definitely wasn't listening to me, And so when I had to go into labor because I had been diagnosed with preeclampsia, I was completely unaware and unprepared, for any dangers. I just did not know. And so the grief of losing my child was compounded with, again, back to the same thing, guilt over what I could have done better. Like, what should I have done? What should I have eaten? What should I have avoided?
That strength of accountability that serviced you well professionally was beating you up mentally.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. But what it also did was that it made me even more focused on, like, okay, how do I do this the right way? Which was not the healthiest approach. It was like, because again, like you said,
right.
Yeah. You just want to do things right. And to that point, it's like, that's not a healthy place to be when you think, oh, I've done all these things wrong. In the next one, I'm going to do things right. It's like, what? And I learned that because also I developed preeclampsia again with Lael, you know? And this time, yes, I had already been through the experience one time. And so I knew the signs and what to look for. But Gary, my body was not behaving, you know, it was not doing what I thought it was supposed to be doing. And this time when I delivered, thankfully, Lael survived the pregnancy, but she was in the NICU for a long time. There was a lot of touch and go moments. But it's also, again, something that I'm just like, oh my gosh, I did this, you know, like I should be better. Like, why am I not a great mom enough to like take care of my body and therefore take care of my kid? It's like, it's such a difficult place to be.
Continuing the journey of difficult places to be, Peter then has his course and life play out.
Yeah.
And you start getting into more pain in your life. Obviously, Lael brings this dynamic that accelerates, you talk about in the book, you and Peter's separation.
Yeah.
Even more. And then Peter goes into his final weeks. Talk us through some of that stuff.
Yeah. You know, Gary, the thing about love is that it's so complicated. You know, I mean, I almost want to laugh when I say that because it sounds so obvious, but it's so true. It's so complicated, you know? So yeah, Peter and I were separated for about 3 years, actually. The complication of it was that I didn't want to ask him for a divorce because I had asked for the separation and I wanted him to come along the journey with me and be like, okay, fine, we're getting to the end now, you know? It was not the smartest strategy, but it was a strategy I had.
Yep.
And by the time he was diagnosed with cancer, he was actually in another relationship. And so was I. So we were friends, you know? And so I had no problem being like, okay, let's figure this out together. You know, I'll take Lael all the time so that you can manage this illness. But by the time we found out that his cancer was terminal, he made the suggestion that we cancel the divorce and we reconcile. And for me, I decided to accept that, not for him, not because he asked me to, you know, but for myself. Like I felt that, you know, here is somebody who I had created a real life with, you know, who I had known for a decade, or more than a decade. We'd been married for a decade.
Yeah.
And again, I think it comes back to that thought of like, okay, now after he's gone, what do I say to myself? You know, what could I have done? What could I have expressed? And I think the main lesson that I learned in our reconciliation was about real forgiveness. You know, there are a lot of
were you able to forgive yourself? Because, you know, in any separation, there's real contributions from both sides.
Yes.
You know what I mean? No matter what it is.
Oh, for sure. For sure. No, there are things that I wish I had done better, for sure. You know, that I hope I'm applying now, you know, in relationships.
You may be applying it, but do you feel like at this point, as we sit here this evening, do you feel like you've forgiven yourself?
No, I don't think so.
And do you see that as the opportunity that I see?
Yes, I do see that as the opportunity. I do. You know, I
think someone powerful enough to write this book that is going to help so many people has a huge opportunity to deploy some forgiveness on one's own self.
Yes, I agree with you. I agree. And that is the hard thing about being human.
Yes.
You know, is that like you can have all the logic you want to, but what happens in your heart sometimes is a totally different thing. You know,
I have a couple more things. God's voice is one. Grief, but there's a question that came in that I have to ask because I'm scared we're going to run out of time.
Yeah.
Did you learn anything new about yourself after you finished writing your journal?
I found that I am more afraid of being vulnerable than I thought I was. You know, I thought that like, oh, look, I've shared so much, right? I've shared so much of myself on social media, in boardrooms, and like, you know, I'm the one out here carrying the big stick and being brave. But
you were sharing what you were ready to share, which is not the definition of vulnerability.
Right. And what happened in this book writing is that, look, I actually didn't write the book I pitched. I wrote a different book. Like the book I pitched was a book about those last weeks of Peter's life. I took a picture every day, right? Of like something that would inspire me or would be interesting because, you know, people said to me all the time, take it one day at a time, take it one day at a time. And I hated that so much. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to take pictures and show people like what my days are like. And so the book I pitched was that it was going to be a, you know, an accounting of all of these moments. I still have the photo album in my phone, you know? But what happens is that when you start recalling those memories, other memories show up, you know? And so vulnerability for me was just like, I got some great advice, you know, from my editor. She was just like, she's like, if you're feeling something and you pull a string and something comes, just write it anyway. You know, you can edit it later, just write it. And then it was like, all of the stuff was coming. Yeah. And so I wrote it all. And at the end of the process, as I'm rereading it, I was just like, okay, I think I can share this. I think it's okay. And I promise you, it is when I turned in that final draft and like, I'm literally sitting on my couch. And now, by the way, I've left Netflix. I'm like, you know, kind of sitting, stewing in my creative process. And I was just like, yo, what'd I do that for? Like I didn't even need to do that. Nobody asked me to do that. I could have been sitting right here doing nothing. And here I am spilling it all. So that's probably the thing I learned was that I have a lot more fear in my vulnerability than I thought.
If you had a dream of this book going so viral that just everyone's reading it, what are the 1 or 2 or 3 things that the masses are walking away from this?
Yeah.
Either changing their perspective on or acting on that you would wish on those masses?
Yeah. I think my real desire for the book is to, well, there's 2 things I want. One, I want to normalize imperfection.
Yes.
You know, I want to normalize that, make people feel like, you know, the scars that you carry they don't need to be hidden. They can be outside. It's okay. You know? And 2 is hope, really. You know, the hope, like the thing is we say all these things like carpe diem and seize the day and like all these like things that make you feel like, oh yeah, you know, let me go get them. And things like you don't actually live your life like that. Okay. You don't. So how can we be more hopeful about, instead of looking at death as like this morbid, terrible thing, but it's actually an inspiration, you know, to live life even more fully, to be excited about it. And not just because like you're going to freaking climb Mount Everest and do all these big things, but like, like we were saying in the beginning, because you want to live like your life in a way that makes you happy and satisfied, you know? And it doesn't have to be that you live to 95 to feel like, oh, I've done something, because the years are not an accomplishment.
No.
The depth is an accomplishment, you know? And so that's what I'm hopeful for.
It's the perfect way to end this. Bose, I could really do this for like 17 more hours. I don't know how people are feeling on the other side. That is not in the cards tonight, but maybe over the next 50 years together.
Oh,
just want to thank you. I want to thank Bose St. John, the author of The Urgent Life, My Story of Love, Loss, and Survival. If you'd like to watch more programs or support the Commonwealth Club's effort in making virtual and in-person programming, please visit commonwealthclub.org/events. I'm Gary Vaynerchuk. Thank you and take care.